Okay. Good evening, everyone. Um, so I decided to do this pasuk, which is the beginning of chapter 29 in this week's parsha of Vayetze. And so what's happened is just the background, which everybody knows, but I'll just to just fill you in where the verse appears that Yaakov Avinu has run away from the family, and he is on his way to his father-in-law in Lavan. And then in the first chapter of this week's Torah reading, he has the dream with the ladder. And then after God gives him all sorts of assurances and promises, he continues his journey. And that's what our verse is. Our verse is um, and this is not a literal translation. I feel bad. This is from the JPS, Jewish Publication Society translation. And it says, Jacob resumed his journey and came to the land of the Easterners. In the Hebrew, it says, Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, and Yaakov lifted his feet and went to the land of the children or the descendants of those who came from this area called Kedem, which can mean either east or the earlier ones. Um, I mean, today we could say people that make grape juice, kedem, but no, but that's not what it is. They come from the land in the east or the earlier land. Now, I was going to talk, and I'm going to talk about walking because it's my name, and I think it's an important it's an important exercise. Rivka and I try to get our 10,000 steps in every day. So the idea of walking is and I'm going to talk about that, but it just so happens, unbeknownst to me, after I had chosen the topic for this week, which I did last Thursday actually, and started collecting the verses, which is part of my method of preparation. But then lo and behold, on Friday, I found out that the area that we're discussing is in the news. I had no idea that the civil war in Syria would start up again. And Haran is right in that area, not that far from Aleppo. Now, we're not sure where biblical Haran is, but the most popular identification for the place that we call Haran is just over the border from Syria into Turkey. And we call this the land of Kedem, which can mean east, except when you look at a map, all of the places identified as biblical Haran are due north of Eretz Yisrael. And it's sort of funny that we refer to them as Easterners when really they should be Northerners. So a lot of commentators, we'll see this in the text in a couple of minutes, talk about how they're called the people of Kedem, which can also not only mean east, but earlier, because they were the beginners of civilization in the valley of the Tigris-Euphrates River. And so just picture in your mind for a minute, if you're in Eretz Yisrael, you go north into Syria, and you keep going straight north all the way through Syria till you reach Turkey. Right around there is Haran, and right around there is the continuation of the Euphrates River. So you go up till you get to Haran, which is very close to the Euphrates, and then you turn right and start going south through a little bit of Syria into Iraq, and that brings you to what's called Mesopotamia, Babylonia. So the object was to go east, but to begin that journey, to go to the east, you had to go north for approximately 400 miles. From Yerushalayim to the area that's Haran is approximately 400 miles. In the good old days, when people traveled by caravan, they would travel between 15 and 25 miles a day on a caravan route. The differences in how much they traveled per day depended upon the terrain. Was it uphill? Was it rocky? How good the trails were? So this trek from Yerushalayim, I measured from Yerushalayim, but he really set out probably from either Hebron or Beersheba. So you just add, another day or so to the journey. Is a journey of under a month, but it's a serious journey, and it's going due north. And our verse, which literally, again, the interpretive translation is Jacob resumed his journey, but really it says Jacob lifted up his legs and went to the land of Bnei Kedem, which meant that place where the earlier ones lived is probably more correct. And the truth is, I did want to sort of talk about, the idea of walking and how important it is to walk. And of course, it's my last name. So part of my thinking was that talk about the significance of, in Jewish tradition, to walk, vayelech, to go, is a very important concept. We're supposed to always be on the correct path, moving. When we get to later parts of the Torah, especially when we get to Devarim, and we have in the idea of the blessings go to people, v'halachta b'drachav, people who have walked in God's pathway. So the Tanya, the originator of the founder of Chabad in his great work, talks about that, and this is the meaning of tzedek shall go, v'yelech, before him. The idea is that we should always walk, go, perform in God's ways. Every performance of the mitzvot and the study of Torah, all of that has to be done in a process of trying to move closer to Hashem, which is why all the blessings are the people that walk in God's path. And we even call our process of listening to Hashem halacha. So the idea of walking, going, is definitely connected in Judaism to spiritual progress. And that idea is in our verse too, that Yaakov Avinu is ready to move forward in his spiritual quest. The person that woke up from the dream of the ladder was not the same person who went to sleep the night before. And our verse is the first expression of that idea. So we're going to talk about, on a more pshat, literal level, what's going on in this movement. And then when we get to the second side, we're going to see a couple of Kabbalistic, Hasidic approaches to the idea of this movement and progress of Yaakov Avinu. This idea that we really have to always be on the move in a positive way is definitely a major part of the Jewish experience. That we are definitely not a sedentary religion. We're into religion as a movement towards a better life, towards becoming a better person. So now let's see some of the more literal approaches to this verse on the first side of the sheet. And Rashi, who we always start with, then Jacob, again, this is the literal meaning, lifted up his feet. There's nothing wrong with the figurative translation of that's at the top of the page. Jacob resumed after the break in the action from the dream of the ladder. But it literally means he lifted up his feet. What does it mean he lifted up his feet? As soon as he received the good tidings that he was assured of God's protection, his heart lifted up his feet and he walked swiftly. In other words, before the dream, Yaakov was full of fear and trepidation. He was really, unsure of where his next step should be, and he was moving relatively slowly. So the purpose of our verse, according to Rashi, is to let us know he's now walking on air. He's moving quickly and confidently after the promises of God to protect him on the travels to Haran and back. Okay, the Sforno, who is really in the same ballpark, same team as Rashi, when a person proceeds on a journey voluntarily at his own initiative. So it says he lifted up his feet. He wanted to go. It was his will to go. That's what the term. So we've already seen, three interpretations of he lifted up. One is to resume. The other is Rashi means he was in a better mood. And here it means it was his choice to go. When he left home, Vayetze Yaakov mir Beersheva, Vayele Harana, he left Beersheva and went towards Haran. It wasn't on his own. It was on his mother, and his father agreed for the necessity of him to go. But now it's Yisan. He lifts up his legs because now it's his decision to go. What had started as his parents' initiative has now become his voluntary mission. This is described in terms of his personality, carrying, lifting his feet. When the initiative is not his, like the beginning of the Parsha, under orders against his will, his feet are described as carrying him. That is his personality. At this point in Yaakov's journey, he belonged to the category of a traveler mentioned first. It's up to me. I'm with this action. This is my decision at this point. The Chizkuni, who's also, again, a more of a literalist and talking about things in a less mystical, less Kabbalistic way, he is more concerned in our verse talking about where he's going. And he's saying it's the land of Aram Naharayim, which is where Avram also had formerly lived, and that this area that today is Syria and parts of Lebanon and parts of Turkey was a land called Aram. Now we know about Arameans. We refer to Lavan in the Seder as an Aramean, Arami Oved Avi. There was an Aramean who tried to destroy my father, and that Aramean, of course, is Lavan. And also we know it because the language of the Talmud is Aramaic. So the Arameans spoke Aramaic, which is a sister language to Hebrew. So he goes to the land of Aram, as we know he quotes from the book of Isaiah, Aram from the east and Philistia from the west. Okay. The Ibn Ezra added that Aram were specifically what we call Syrians. So this is exactly where that civil war is going on in Syria today. Moreover, that northern area of Syria that borders on present-day Turkey. Moreover, we had previously explained that Aram and Haran are one and the same. I'm not sure that's exactly true. Most people think Haran was the name of the city, Aram was the name of the area. But he feels that the two can really be, for our purposes, used interchangeably. Okay. We have to say that Yaakov traveled the same route that his grandfather, Avraham, had traveled when coming from Haran. Now, that's almost obvious that there were a limited number of caravan routes that would take you from Eretz Yisrael to the top of the Fertile Crescent, which is Haran. And then at that point, you make a right turn and you start going south, again, following the caravan routes until you get all the way to the Persian Gulf. Okay? So he is following exactly the route that Avraham had taken in Lech Lecha. That Avraham coming from Haran southward after having left both Ur Kasdim and Haran on his way to the land of Canaan. He had proceeded south. This is Avraham. He proceeded southward in stages all the way to Beersheba. We know he stopped at Shechem. He stopped at Beit El. He stopped at he stopped, well, eventually in Jerusalem. He stopped in Hebron. There were many places. He stopped till he actually made his home in Beersheba. The route was well known, and they were familiar with it. By familiar, I don't think that Chizkuni means that Yaakov had done it and knew the whole way, but he knew that such a route existed, and he understood that it would be relatively easy to follow this well-known ancient highway. It's hard to call it a highway, caravan route. This is the reason why Yaakov also used this route. When God said that, he said, seeing that this is the righteous person taking so much trouble to come to my residence, how can I allow him not to have shelter for the night? So that's the story of the night of the dream before this. He's going back, okay? This is why he arranged for the sun to set prematurely. That was the story of the dream, that he came to a place which was eventually going to be Makom HaMikdash, the place of the Beit HaMikdash. So that's when God caused the sun to set, and Yaakov stayed there, even though Yaakov knew the route. During that night, he dreamt the dream reported in detail in our chapter. It becomes clear to him that the place he had slept was destined to become a temple. I don't know why it says a temple. I should have changed it to the temple. Realizing that this was the meaning of the dream, he called the site House of God, Beit El, which had been Luz before. Okay. And so all of this is telling us that Chizkuni wants us to know that this was a well-defined route, that Yaakov Avinu knew exactly where he was going. And what was unusual wasn't him on the route, was the fact that the dream stopped him. But the dream stopped him temporarily, but gave him the impetus to feel confidence in this mission that he was on. Okay. Please go down to the Ha'emek Davar, who, of course, is the Netziv. Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, and the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. I've told the story before that he's the father of Reb Meir Bar Ilan, who came to Eretz Yisrael, and Bar Ilan University is named after because he Hebraicized his name when he came to Eretz Yisrael. So the Netziv says, when Yaakov left for the lands of the children of the east, and then he puts in parenthesis, this is my translation from his text, Kedem perhaps means earlier. Now, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, that the land of Kedem can also mean the land of not just the eastern ones, but the earlier ones. This one makes more sense than calling it east, because it's north. It's really mamash, due north from Eretz Yisrael. You go in a straight line from Beersheba. Well, it's not exactly straight, but it's pretty straight. From Beersheba to Hebron, to Yerushalayim, to Shechem, to Damascus, straight up to Haran. And that's due north the whole way. The whole time you're going due north. So why they called the people of Kedem? Because they were the ones who were the originators of the civilization that Avraham and we Jews descended from. There were two great cradles of civilization in the Middle East. There was Egypt at the Nile, and then first the Akkadians, the Sumerians, then the Babylonians, the Assyrians. In the Tigris Euphrates River Valley. So we were like in between, but we were connected to the Babylonian side. And that was the earlier ones. They were our ancestors. So when Yaakov left, he was afraid of falling into a stumbling block. He was afraid that this mission could destroy him, either physically or spiritually. I mean, and he faced dangers both to his physical body and to his spiritual. He talked about how difficult it was living with Lavan, who was a Russia. Therefore, since he was worried about stumbling blocks, both physical ones and metaphoric ones, therefore he elevated his step. It says, Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, he lifted up his feet. Why did he lift up his feet? Because he was consciously trying to avoid pitfalls, stumbling blocks, michsholim. The implication is that his walking was elevated for the purpose of not being pulled or dragged into a different nature like that of the Bnei Kedem. What was true about these people of the previous culture, the previous empire? They were idolaters. They were idolaters when Avram was there. They were still idolaters 2 generations later. So he was really worried of being influenced by the Bnei Kedem, not because they're Easterners, but because they lived the ancient lifestyle. What was the ancient lifestyle? Idolatry, avodah zarah. He was preparing himself greatly to be careful. So v'yisa, his feet, did it mean he moved swiftly, or did it mean he moved carefully? And Emek Dava says it's careful. Kliyakar, on the same topic, says that Yaakov lifted his feet and went. This was accomplished through great effort, which is different from his first walking, which was accomplished through a miracle. Now we know that at the beginning of his trip, there were many stories about Kfitzat HaDerech, that God gave him literally a leap on the road, that he took one step and went many miles with each step. There was a miraculous Kfitzat HaDerech along the way. So initially, he had miraculous travel arrangements, okay? But now he worked on it himself, and he was energetic, and he could accomplish a lot just out of his own energy. From now on, he wouldn't be blessed with Kfitzat HaDerech, with this jumping of the road, but would walk under his own power. Okay, so we've already had 5 different interpretations of Vayisa. Vayisa, according to the JPS, he resumed. According to Yaakov, according to Rashi, Yaakov had enthusiasm. According to the Sforno, it meant he did it voluntarily. According to the Chizkuni, he was going on a well-trod path. According to the Emek Dava, the Netziv, he was avoiding stumbling blocks. And then this last one is just telling us, which is the 6th, that he was just walking under his own power now. Okay. Jacob raised his feet. An additional meaning of the Torah's description of Jacob raising his feet is that he did not actually have to walk the entire distance to Haran, but that land came towards him. So there's another interpretation that a miracle happened the other way, that there was a Kfitzat HaDerech. So the Or HaChaim disagrees with the Kliyakar. Okay, most of us believe that the Kfitzat HaDerech, the jumping of the road, already had taken place and was not in action anymore. I just want to add one point here, that Rev Hankin, I didn't put it on the sheet, Rev Yehuda Hankin, who was a really fine rabbi here in Eretz Yisrael. He died, must be 20 years ago, and a really fine scholar. He pointed out that the Vayelech in our verse really represents a reality of biblical stories. that it's rare in biblical stories that any males are found riding. That when a male in the ancient world went from point A to point B, he walked. It's very rare. Unless you're like a king, regular people walked, but often women didn't. Often women were put onto a donkey or onto a camel, as we saw with Rivka a couple of weeks ago. But men tended to walk. And he said that this fits into what's going on in our story as well. Okay. The Radak. We're now at the beginning of the back page. And the Radak and the Rashbam are again the last of the literalists on our explanation of what happened. The Radak says, Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, he lifts up his legs and goes, seeing that God had given him promises and found him worthy of such a far-reaching prophetic insight that was the dream with the ladder. He rejoiced. He wasn't just moving with newfound energy. There was a joy to it now. He felt this sense of mission in what he was doing. He rejoiced and continued on his way with ease. Up until that night, Yaakov had proceeded hesitantly, beset by doubts and anxieties. Yaakov spends much of his life with doubts and anxieties. This story here, of course, the doubts and anxieties are not mentioned, but God reassures him on the way back, and he's getting ready to meet Esav. God says, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, Yaakov. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." And then later he has to go down to Egypt, and God says, "Don't be afraid." So this theme of Yaakov often being afraid of some new stage in his life comes up, numerous times. And that's why in Judaism, one of the songs that are popular to be sung by people at a Malava Malka is Al Tira Avdi Yaakov. Yaakov, don't be afraid. So even though we don't have those words here, like we're going to have in next week's Parsha, Vayishlach, and in about 4 weeks' Parsha, when we get to Miketz, nevertheless, the concept is very similar. He was filled with apprehension and doubts, and now God has taken them away. After fleeing from the wrath of his brother, seeing that his danger had not been imminent while his father was still alive, he had not been traveled with speed, something typical of people fleeing for their lives. As he wasn't traveling fast until after the dream, because he didn't feel, he was afraid and unsure, and that's why he traveled slowly, but he wasn't running for his life because he knew his mother had told him that Esau wasn't going to kill him until after the death of Yitzchak. Okay, the Rashbam, who's the grandson of Rashi, and is the last of the literalists that we're going to take a look at this evening. Again, Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, seeing that he had received assurances, promises from God during his nocturnal dream, he now proceeded encouragingly, joyfully, something that the Torah describes with the words, he lifted up his feet. So these two commentaries add that Yisa, lifting your feet, is a sign not just of confidence, but also a sign literally of joy, of happiness, that he felt he was really doing the right thing. He felt this sense of mission. Okay, take a deep breath. We're now going to leave any thoughts of pshat, of literalism behind us. The next 3 commentaries we're going to take a look at are definitely much more into the Kabbalistic approach. The 2 of the 3 are Hasidim, and we're going to start with the Ohev Yisrael. The Ohev Yisrael was the original Avram Yeshua Heschel. The famous Avram Yeshua Heschel, who died in 1972, was a professor at Jewish Theological Seminary, is a direct descendant, I think 6 generations removed, from the original Avram Yeshua Heschel at the beginning of the 1800s, and he wrote a famous Perush on Chumash called Ohev Yisrael, the one who loves Israel. And he's sort of introducing what's going to be said by the three commentaries here at the back page. There are amazing secrets hidden in this section. So up until now, it seemed like, oh, it's an open book. Oh, for some reason, he was now, in a good place, moving with alacrity, and felt like a weight had been lifted from him, and he moved nicely. But no, not according to the mystical interpretations here on the back page. Here, there are secrets. Everything here is a Kabbalistic, mystical secret. Every human being is an olam katan. We refer to the universe as Adam Gadol, and we refer to each individual humans as a small world. The world is a massive human, and the individual humans are small universes. There are many secrets in Kabbalah which are referred to by different parts of the human body. So in other words, when we talk about the heart, we mean something. We talk about the brain, we mean something. We talk about the kidneys, we mean something. But he wants to tell us what is meant when we refer to someone's feet. The words referred to by arms and legs are the outside issues. When I talk about somebody's spleen, I'm talking about inner stuff. When I talk about arms and legs, I'm talking about chitzoniyut. We're talking about the outer aspects, Kabbalistic aspects, but outer aspects that can be observed by other humans that watch the person we're talking about. As we know, Yaakov Avinu represents the being upon the divine throne. In the first chapter of Yechezkel, we have the image of this moving throne, the divine throne of God that moves from place to place. And the throne has a four-sided base to it with three animals and a human face. According to Kabbalah, the human face that was on the divine throne, as described in the first chapter of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, the face was that of Yaakov Avinu. So Yaakov's face, his hands, his legs are like the paradigm for a human face, human hands, human feet. He becomes, in that sense, the perfect human being. It's like that famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci of the guy, with the arms out, and up and down and stretched out, and it shows all of the perfect relationships between the parts of the body. If Da Vinci had been a Kabbalist, it would have been a picture of Yaakov Avinu. In other words, the externals that represent the perfection of a human being, according to Jewish tradition, that is Yaakov. So we talk about Yaakov's legs, we're talking about the perfect, the ideal legs. Yaakov has this exalted position because he represents Emet. He represents Titain Emet liYaakov, Chesed liAvram. So we get to Yaakov Avinu, we get truth. Truth means reality. So his legs are like the perfect legs. His hands are like the true embodiment of hands or legs, which is central to the words called Elyon, on high. If you're going to make, in heaven, they're going to make a picture of a human body, it's going to be Yaakov's, on high. This is related to the reality that God himself refers as, God self-refers. Okay, when God says who he is to somebody, he calls himself Anochi, like the beginning of the Ten Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, which has the same gematria as Kisei. So why is this important? Because when God describes himself, he describes himself as Anochi, I, which equals throne. And whose face is on the throne? Yaakov. So Yaakov becomes an embodiment of God's creation of humanity in Olam Hazeh, in this world. All of Yaakov's limbs were fit to adorn the throne. And when Yaakov wanted to go to the lands of the east, lands of what's going on in the east. Now, I said on the first side that lands of the east was where the earlier ones lived, and they worshipped idolatry. Here, the Or Yisrael, excuse me, Rabbi Heschel brings up a totally different issue. When you go to the lands of the east, you find magicians, soothsayers, necromancers. This is where Bilam came from. This is where people did all sorts of these, magical things, which they believed worked. He was afraid that his power on the outside might not protect his innermost realities. Yaakov had an ingenious plan. He lifted his regel, his leg, which meant that he had figured out how to connect his outer power to the highest levels of holy power. What's it mean he lifted his leg? He lifted his leg to the same spiritual level which existed in his heart and in his mind and in his soul. He lifted his leg from being a physical entity which could be harmed by those bad guys, those magicians, okay, to a higher plane of spiritual existence where no magic, where no curses could in any way hurt his physical body. He lifted his physical body to a spiritual plane. That's what our verse means when it says he lifted up his legs. He figured out that his neshama was strong enough to raise his physical being to be totally impervious to the machinations and the magic and all that bad stuff that these guys in the East could possibly do to him. Then he felt confident to travel to Kedem. I have spiritually made my limbs immune to their magic, and so I can go safely to those places. Only at that point could he see the well. The verse after this, he lifts his legs and poof, he's in Haran and he sees a well in a field with three flocks of sheep. He could only see the well and have the power to roll the rock off the well, which is the next part of the story, once he has lifted his physical body to a higher plane. It's like, most people have to go to the gym to make their body strong. Yaakov made his body strong by somehow imbuing his physical attributes with his spiritual strength. And that's why not only could he roll the rock off, but beforehand he couldn't even see the rock. He had to rise to a spiritual level, a higher spiritual level, to be able to even see the rock. Only at that point could he see the well in the field. And remember, the well, Be'er, is really Torah Shebaal Peh. The wellspring of our spiritual lives is the Torah. So the wellspring of water is also the wellspring of Torah, because Torah is often compared to water. They both give life. The three flocks that he sees in the field, they represent Nefesh, one's life force, one's neshama, one's divine soul, and one's ruach, one's spirit that connects us from this realm to the spiritual realm. They gathered at the well, which is the well of the living Torah. The Evan, the rock, on top of it equals Av. So Aleph, Bet, Nun is really a contraction of two words. Av, Nun. Why the father of Nun, 50? Because we believe that there are 50 levels of Torah knowledge. So the rock represents the 50 levels of Nun, the 50 levels of Torah that you can achieve in this world. Very mystical, but it's also gets in the same idea of he found a way to give his physical body power. But the ramifications in this sense are much broader than we had said before. The Shnei Luchot HaBrit, okay, I'm starting to run out of time. The Shnei Luchot HaBrit is Reb Yeshayahu Horowitz. Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz was a great mystic. He lived in Central Europe, and as a middle-aged man, around the age of 25, in those days that was already middle age for them, he came to Eretz Yisrael and he moved to Tveria. And in Tveria, and you can actually go to visit his grave. There are a lot of graves in Tveria. His is one of the few that I have confidence that who they say is buried there is really buried there. But as opposed to Rabbi Akiva and even the Rambam is probably not in the place that they say he is. But Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz really is buried where they say he is. So he writes in this mystical work called Shnei Luchot HaBrit, the two tablets of the law. When the Torah reports Jacob proceeding towards Eretz Bnei Kedem, it also mentioned here there was a well in the field, similar to what we just saw. We get the feeling that the well suddenly loomed up out of nowhere. It did, according to the O of Yisrael. He couldn't see it before, so it sort of did loom up out of nowhere. What was so special about that well? Besides, what did our sages wish to teach us when they said that all of the zvagim were accomplished at the well? We know that, Rivka was, what word should I use? Was approached at the well, and we know the same thing is going to happen with Rachel. And there's a midrash that Avraham met Sarah at a well as well. Now, I just want to quick story. In the good old days, when I lived in Efrat, we used to walk through Arab villages, and all of the Arab villages that we walked through outside of town in Yehuda, in our area, outside of town had like pools. There were streams that came around, and they would at some point, dam it up and make like a pool. And historically, women used to go to these pools to do laundry, and men would come and stand on the hillside and look down at the women washing the clothes for the family, and that's where the shidduchim came from. So this idea that in the Bible shidduchim take place at a well, that was true into the 20th century. Many of these villages, almost all of these villages, didn't have running water until we conquered them in the Six-Day War. So when I was walking around living in Efrat in the 80s, people were still using these pools for laundry purposes to save water. And that's where the men went to watch, to pick out the women. It just happened. The word be'er, well, is used in a spiritual sense. A well of living water, the fountain of the tree of life, hidden since Adam's expulsion from Gan Eden. The word be'er, when you reverse it, gives us the word rabbah, the same word we use in Kaddish, Amen Yeheshmei Rabbah. Amen, may the Lord's name be great. So a be'er is not only Torah, but it also represents the greatness of Hashem. And again, wells, water sources are not only a tremendous asset to the community physically, but spiritually was very, very important as well. So he could only see the well, get to the well after he had raised his spiritual level. This brings us to the last commentary on the page, who is the Sfat Emet. And we're going to do two comments by the Sfat Emet. And the Sfat Emet in these two comments is really a source for two different approaches to our verse. When we see our verse, and we've already seen this, but the Sfat Emet is going to really delineate the idea very clearly. We've already seen that he lifted up his legs and he went. So some people say, he lifted up his legs because of the story that just happened with the dream. Other people said, as we saw in both the Oav Yisrael and the Shnei Luchot Brit, he lifted up his legs, his spiritual, pulling himself up allowed him to see and to overcome the well. So is our verse connected to the previous story? He could only lift up his legs because of the dream. Or is it connected to the next story? He could only see the well and roll the rock off the well because he had spiritually lifted himself to a higher level. Is it connected to the previous story, or is it connected to the next story? And I think they're both true. I think they're equally true. But let's first take a look and say the Sfat Emet expresses those two ideas. Concerning Yaakov, and I wrote down, he said this in 1875. Concerning Yaakov, it is written, he rolled Gal, the rock, from over the well. So we see that our verse is connected to the next story. This is about defeating his Yetzer Hara, which is always bigger than we think. So the rock represented his Yetzer Hara, this massive rock that he had to move. With Yaakov, the language for roll, gal, is also the word for reveal, legalot, to reveal something, to reveal a secret, legalot sod. He transformed his evil inclination to good and clarified that everything can be good. This was revealed when he was able to lift his feet and go to Haran. So in other words, the lifting his feet was raising himself to a higher spiritual level where the rock wasn't going to be a problem for him anymore because he had defeated his Yetzer Hara. And now he can see the rock and roll it off of the well. And then he's ready to become Yaakov Avinu. A few years later, in 1871, the Sfat Emet wrote, Yaakov embodied the entire creation. How do we know that? And his form is carved below Hashem's throne. In other words, his form is on divine throne, which we already saw in the Oav Yisrael. Excuse me. And so he is like the perfect human being. And so what happened? Hashem folded all of Eretz Yisrael under Yaakov. It's a famous midrash on the dream when it says, "Ufaratza Yama Kebet Tzvon V'Nogba," you're going to spread because all of Eretz Yisrael. Then God says, "And the land you're lying on will be given to your children." So God folded up all of Eretz Yisrael. He was lying on the entirety of Eretz Yisrael, necessitating his travels to various places. So the purpose of his traveling around wasn't just to get a wife. It was to make sort of a kinyan, sort of an acquiring of the land in Eretz Yisrael. One of the ways you can make a kinyan on a field is to walk around it. You first have to pay the money, but then you walk around. You have to do an act of acquiring, but walking around can be that act. So he's doing the same thing because we believe that the ultimate boundaries of Eretz Yisrael will go all the way up to Haran and include all of Lebanon and all of most of modern day Syria. So it says, Yaakov lifted up his feet and traveled to the land of Bnei Kedem, indicating he elevated even the lowliest places to their divine source. Rashi explains that after Hashem's promise, it was easier for Yaakov to travel. Initially, he feared the spiritual danger, but with the assurance of spreading to all corners, he continued confidently. Yaakov also introduced at that point the Arvit Ma'ariv, the evening prayer, symbolizing finding light even in darkness. So again, the Sfat Emet, in his mystical way in 2 different years, said, yeah, lifting up his leg, That's what gave him the power to do that miraculous act when he gets to Haran. Lifted up his leg. It's a result of that dream that had already happened and gave him the confidence to move forward. Which is true? Both. And this is the real message that we have to take away for ourselves, which is we have to think carefully about what things we want to do. And once we really have decided that a certain course of action is necessary, is important, then we have to do it with the confidence that is described here by Yaakov. Uh, I want you to know, I find difficulty in identifying with Avraham because he was just so good. I mean, it's like he always did the right thing. He was, I mean, he was nice to everybody. I just can't, I mean, it's wonderful, but I just can't emulate that so much. Okay. Yitzhak, he's very otherworldly. I've trouble, trying to be uh, on a spiritual plane like Yitzhak. Yaakov, on the other hand, who's a synthesis of the both of them, who the Torah tells us over and over again of his difficulties, his trials, his problems, problems with his brother, problems later with his wives and his children. All of this stuff is eminently relatable. And I think this entire story of Yaakov really begins here in our verse, that Yaakov, going through all of these amazingly difficult trials, he just lifts up his leg and he pushes forward through it and accomplishes what must be done. I think uh, God forbid, I love Avram and I love Yitzchak. I just have trouble being them. Yaakov, on the other hand, we just have to use his example to just, when the going gets tough, just lift up your legs, push yourself forward, and it's amazing what you can accomplish. And it's Yaakov who teaches us this idea. I know there was a lot of mysticism, and otherworldly references in all of these commentaries, but I think the bottom line is Yaakov sees what must be done and finds a way to just pull himself together, lift up his leg, move forward, and get the job done. And I think that's a great message for us. It's an amazingly important message for us. There are just so many things in life that we have trouble getting going. We have to just remember Yaakov. Just lift up those legs, get yourself moving forward, and it's amazing what you can accomplish once you have really decided that this action or this problem is what you have to take care of. And it's Yaakov that teaches us. And I'm very proud that my last name embodies the same idea as Yaakov getting to where he has to be. Because we all want to be walkers like Yaakov Avinu, and hopefully his model is an inspiration for us to just keep moving forward and pick the jobs that have to be done and find the inner strength to just get it done. And Baruch Hashem, Yaakov is there, and week after week, I just find inspiration in what Yaakov overcomes, and hopefully we can emulate his amazing example, and we can all become, the man of truth who is Yaakov Avinu. Okay. Thank you all very much for joining this evening. And like I said, when I chose this, I didn't realize it was also going to be a front page as well. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Margaret. Okay. Good night, everyone. And
thank you.
we just have to find the energy and the oomph to continually move forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you so much. That's really